In this week's episode, I interview a fellow veteran, Christina Coleman, about the topic of self-worth. As a transformational life coach, she helps us unpack where some of those feelings and beliefs may stem from, identifying the patterns and figuring out how to overcome them. It's a great conversation, so stay tuned for part one.
Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. I'm Trish.
And I'm Julie. We are two nurses exploring holistic healing and wellness practices to empower you to be the leader of your own health. Join us as we try out new things, or as we call it, weird shit, and have some fun along the way. Hello, welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. Today, I am talking with Christina Coleman, who is a transformational life coach and Air Force veteran. She supports people from all walks of life to heal their past, live mindfully and peacefully in the present, and intentionally create their future. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and is J. Shetty certified, as well as Mastery Method certified through the Institute for Coaching Mastery. Today, we wanted to focus our conversation around worthiness and self-acceptance and love. Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project, Christina.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you today. And I love the topic. Worthiness is one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yes. Why don't you give us a little background on your story coming out of the military and how that shaped your path into life coaching?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll try to highlight my own pieces of an unworthiness story in the process because I think they'll serve later in our conversations. For me, I actually knew I wanted to be a life coach since I was like 13 years old. And I'm 30 years old now. So it wasn't really in high demand at the time. I had these big dreams. I wanted to help people. So this was planted very early for me. But the military route came about when I was about 17 years old. I actually got kicked out of my house. And I was a really good kid by like society standards, straight A's, doing everything I was supposed to be doing. My father, he had a tendency for anger and he didn't really know how to emotionally regulate. So that's what led to me being kicked out. That's what also led to me straying away from that dream I had of being a life coach because I had all these big dreams of wanting to go to college and everything to get a psychology degree. And when I got kicked out, I felt that as a big rejection. This is where a lot of my unworthiness story comes from, that rejection of you don't belong here, coming from one of my primary caregivers. And then I went to move in with friends throughout my last year of high school. And I actually moved around between three different homes with three different friends and their families. It can be a little difficult bringing together those dynamics, like two teenage girls, and now they're sharing their parents with me and they're sharing their home with me. Some forms of what I perceive to be rejection came from that too. That's why I moved between three homes because things were happening there in those dynamics. So that felt like another rejection. You don't belong here. And capitalized on that unworthiness that was already showing up in my experience. I reached this place where I didn't want anyone else to have to take care of me. I didn't feel like I belonged or anything like that. That's really what led me to go into the military because it was an avenue for me to get my psychology degree, follow some of these dreams I had, but also maybe belong somewhere and be able to take care of myself. Those same patterns of feeling unworthy and like I didn't belong also played out and manifested in the military too, in so many ways. We can dive into whatever serves later, but until we clear a pattern story, a feeling like that, it's going to keep playing itself out. And that's what I saw. There was a lot of unworthiness patterns playing out in different ways because it can show up as like people pleasing or comparing yourself to others or being in unhealthy relationship dynamics. That's one way it played out for me too. I got married like right after getting into the military to someone I had only known for 9 months. He had a lot of those angry, abusive tendencies like my father. I was repeating those patterns of unworthiness with my father, then with my partner at the time. And there was just so much misalignment happening for me in there. I also was in a career field in the military that I didn't know at the time, but wasn't really morally aligned to who I am because I was a baby. I was like 18 years old when I went in. I didn't know what I believed yet or who I was. There was just a lot of misalignment happening. And the root of all of it was unworthiness. And I didn't know that when I was there. It's something I see now in hindsight after doing all my own work and everything through coaching. I just kept reaching these breaking points. There was a moment in that marriage and in the military where I woke up and I saw all the abuse. I saw all the misalignment. And it was this heavy, crushing weight that I didn't really know what to do with. I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the resources to know what to do with this crushing pain. I was in so much pain and I didn't know how to make any of it go away. There were parts of me that were like, why am I even here? What's the point of even living? That's so far from who I am and who I identify as because I have this vibrancy and love for life. So I reached that really low point, and that helped me to realize if I can feel this way, if I can feel this terrible, I can only imagine what the experience is like for other people too. That reignited it for me. What am I doing? Why am I here? I've known I want to help people heal since I was a child. I kept seeing myself repeat the patterns, especially in romantic relationships like abuse, narcissism, things like that. And I again reached this breaking point after my divorce when I was dating other people and everything, where I was like, I can't effing do this anymore. There was a bit of a victim mindset too. Like, why does this keep happening to me? Why do I keep ending up with people that mistreat me? 'Cause I knew leaving that marriage was going to be really hard. And leaving any abusive relationship after that was also hard. I had this huge moment of clarity because I kept asking, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why am I here? I was literally in ShopRite buying quinoa one day and I just sat up and I was like, oh shit, I don't think I'm good. It was this huge revelation for me because I was reading all the books and listening to all the podcasts and everything, but nothing was working. The same patterns kept happening. So uncovering that, I'm not good enough. I don't feel worthy of a good relationship, of a good man. That was one of the most eye opening moments of my life because once we're aware of it, then we can transform it. That's what brought me full circle back around to those dreams that I had when I was younger and when I knew I wanted to do life coaching. Everything changed for me when I worked on my worthiness. It was at the root of pretty much all of my patterns, perfectionism, people pleasing, etc. When I reframed and repatterned all of that and healed it at the root where it came from versus just putting a band-aid on it, I was no longer people pleasing. I was no longer self sacrificing. I stopped getting into abusive relationships. I saw how expansive my life became and how literally everything changed. That is why I had to reignite that dream and come back to this because one of the things I'm the most passionate about is helping people wake up to the worthiness that has always been there. I couldn't possibly emphasize enough the importance of doing worthiness work. That's what brought me right back here to where we are today.
That's quite the story. You described that there was a couple of moments where you had these breakthroughs. Was that something happening in your life that drove that breakthrough, or was it just through a lot of inner work that suddenly, like, the clouds cleared for you and you were able to see some things differently?
Yeah, there was a bit of both actually. One example that comes to mind initially is like with the abuse in my marriage. He was in the military too. We worked together and we had a lot of the same friends, of course. I got all these messages of my unworthiness growing up. It just kept getting reconfirmed over and over again. One example I really want to share here that ties into all this is about being a woman. From a young age, I learned that I was less worthy because I was a woman. I remember, and this helped me with some of those aha moments that you asked. I remember this moment in sixth grade. It was wood shop class, and my best friend was a man. He asked if I'd be his partner to build this little bridge out of tiny little pieces of wood. The teacher looked at him and he was like, oh, are you sure you want to partner with her? And he was like, yeah, I do, I'm sure. And he was like, you want a girl to be your partner for this project? My heart just sank. Then that same teacher, he was also the track and field coach, and I ran track and field. Someone had to back out of the 800-meter race. So he came to me and he said, hey, can you jump in on this right now? And I knew I could do it. I knew. I'd run it a bunch of times and I was good at it. The anxiety that came up in my body because I remembered what he said. I looked at him and I just shook my head. No words could come out. The look of disgust on his face when I said no, that stuck with me too. So I had all this messaging just around being a woman, you're not good enough. Some of that got reinforced in the military, right? Because what we believe keeps getting reinforced until we open the aperture to believe something else. Some of that was reignited in the military too. Some of these aha moments definitely came from new perspectives and insights that came through as I uncovered all of this. This is where the inner work came in because I started looking at my past to think, where did all this come from? Why am I in a room surrounded with men, knowing the answer and not raising my hand to answer it? Or hearing everyone else give the answer to the question and knowing I have a better one, not in an egotistical way or I'm better than you kind of way, but no, I have a really good response to that. But I'm too scared to raise my hand and speak it out loud. Reflecting back on where it all came from helped me see the ways I was playing it out in my current reality and experience. And then I was able to do the inner work around that and required to do it. And one other thing I'll share about that because it was inner work, but also little moments that led to the ahas. Some of our mutual friends in my marriage, they would see him do things that were a little off, but no one ever said anything. Like, I remember this one time at a friend's house, my ex-husband, he was drunk and he kept pushing me into the wall and things like that. It clearly wasn't okay. He was clearly pushing me. Like the painting got knocked over on the wall because he pushed me so hard. And no one said anything. I already believed I was unworthy. I already believed this was okay. I was in full blown autopilot, just going through the motions. And nobody ever said anything. Then one day, somebody I barely knew just heard him say something to me and it didn't even register. He was like, "Hey, I know we're like just meeting." It was a coworker. He was like, "Is it okay if I ask you a question?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah, sure, of course." He goes, "Does he always talk to you like?" I had this huge moment because nobody had ever said that to me before, people I was really close to. Then this stranger looked at me and said that. And I will forever love this person because he helped me see it. That moment alone changed my life. It's little moments like that that help give you the aha and bring the clarity. But then it's the inner work that you do when you have the moment that really changes it.
That's really interesting that you needed something external for you to recognize something that is such an internal aspect of your life. When you think about worthiness, how do you untangle self-worth from, let's say, self-confidence? Because they're not
Yeah.
the
So,
same thing, right?
yeah, I love that. They're very similar, but they are different. When clients come to me, for example, they don't sit across from me in this chair and then say, "I want to work on my self worth. I don't think I'm good enough." It gets maxed in a lot of ways. Sometimes it can show up as confidence. That's the gateway to show you don't have self worth, but it isn't the pure identifier because there might just be areas in your life where you don't feel confident. And confidence is like a pattern, it's a way of being. Where as worthiness, I view it as like a whole body experience. I don't think I'm worthy enough or good enough to be in this room is different than I don't think I have the knowledge to speak in front of these people. Confidence can be more about the capabilities and the knowledge that you have, whereas worthiness is me as a person, who I am without any label, without the label of life coach or mother or sister or whatever. If you remove every label, every identification, every achievement, accolade, level of success, if you remove all of that, underneath it, I don't feel worthy. I don't feel good enough. I'm masking that with success. That's very different as a whole, as a person in my body. I don't feel good enough compared to I'm lacking some confidence in this area or that area. And they can be interrelated, but you're absolutely right that they are different. So that's part of how I view it. If you're lacking confidence somewhere, it could indicate that there's some unworthiness within you. Confidence alone doesn't necessarily mean you feel it.
How do you recognize that somebody is really lacking self-worth? Do you use any tools or are there just patterns that you are recognizing in your client? What are some ways that people can really dig in and figure out whether self-worthiness is at the heart of some of their issues or not?
Yeah, yeah. What I would say around that is really deeply tuning in to the worthiness messages you received throughout your life can help you identify it. I'll start with the patterns and then I'll get into that. Some of the patterns, for example, could be comparing yourself to others, not trusting yourself, confidence, right? A lack of confidence or self doubt, a fear of being seen or judged or putting yourself out there, even a fear of success or an upper limit. That's another way you could identify. These are all ways you could identify if there might be a worth issue within you. It could also be hitting upper limits. I lose the weight and I gain it back. I lose the weight and I gain it back. This yo effect. Or like an upper limit with losing weight or with finances. I've been trying to hit 100K a year and I've never been able to do it. The self sabotage that kind of comes in sometimes. Those are some identifiers of how it might be coming up for you. And I'll share some examples to help ground that a little bit. Percent of what we do is unconscious. A lot of times we don't realize all this is playing out. Most of us don't until we wake up from it. I had a client who she kept trying to reach this level of success at work. And she kept getting to a certain point and then self sabotaging. Like she would stop showing up, she would stop doing the work. And I asked her, what do you fear about being successful? If you get this promotion, if you get this opportunity, what's there? Are you afraid something's going to happen? And she really tuned in. And she started to cry. She got emotional. And she said, I'm really scared of people judging me because I don't think I actually deserve to be here. I feel all this imposter syndrome, like I'm not smart enough, good enough to be in this position. So I'm scared that if I get it, people are going to judge me. I'm going to be seen. They're going to realize I'm a fake. What if I fail? What if they realize and then it gets taken away from me? So then the fear of failure comes up. The fear of being seen comes up. All of this stuff was underneath the surface. This is why she was self sabotaging to keep herself safe from the feeling of unworthiness that would come about if she got this promotion and it got taken away or people really saw her. You can see it play out in your patterns and your upper limits in such a profound way. If you asked a question about tools to move through it, a big part of this, I'll give some things later if you think it would serve around things people can try on their own, but I would highly encourage getting the support of a trained professional in this because you can do a certain amount of work by yourself, but it's a whole other level when you're guided by somebody who can really hold that space for you. I held that space for her. We really put love and attention on the parts of herself that she had been avoiding, the fear, avoiding really looking herself in the mirror and thinking that she could do this. We took a loving look at all these parts and have her embrace them instead of avoid them through some somatic processes and some unconscious processes. And we started to wake her up as she embraced these parts, the fear, for example, instead of avoiding the fear and running from it and pretending it wasn't there. Ironically, when she embraced the fear began to dissipate and she realized, oh, I can be here with this fear and I'm actually okay right now. Fear is here, but it's not who I am. So when we disidentify with some of these things that are coming up from us, it creates this separation that actually allows us to start moving through it. And when she did that and upgraded and changed her stories that she was creating in her head about what was possible for her and what she was capable of, once we disentangled that, she was able to get the promotion, but not only get it, but sustain it and keep it and not let these self sabotaging patterns come up because she was no longer fearing what other people would think or fearing being seen or thinking she was an imposter and wasn't good enough to hold that position because we really gave those parts that were scared and the parts that felt unworthy a voice and a seat at the table versus just pushing them aside and numbing them. We went back to the root. Where was some of this planted? What are some of the beliefs that brought you here? And what I would encourage everyone to start sitting with to help you get here is what were some of the key messages you received about worthiness growing up? What did you learn about worthiness from your mom, your dad, from any other primary caregiver? And an example of that from my life, I remember when I was a kid, there were Victoria's Secret magazines everywhere. I always remember it was so beautiful. I always saw her putting on all this makeup and doing her hair, and she was gorgeous without it. But I saw her doing that, and I unconsciously bought into the misunderstanding that I have to look a certain way in order to be valuable, loved, and all of that. This is what I mean. As you look back at these moments of your life, what are some of those unconscious things that planted seeds? And then those seeds turned into your beliefs, whether you realized it or not. So that's a really good place to start. And it doesn't just have to be childhood, it can also be as a teenager. What did I learn about me? Another example of this is I had some friends growing up who, yeah, I had one really good friend, male friend growing up, and he would only really call me when him and his girlfriend were fighting. I would listen and I would give him advice and I would help him. I learned that I'm valuable when I'm giving advice. I'm valuable when I'm help, when I'm supporting. Otherwise, I'm maybe not so worthy because he wasn't talking to me most of the time when they were. So again, that's another message. It can come from our parents. It can come from romantic partners, from friendships. A really good place to start is just tuning into what are some of these messages that I was receiving throughout my life and even adulthood too. I have tons of examples from like the military and everything. I find that's a really good place to start. And a lot of people haven't thought about that. What are the messages I was receiving and what beliefs did those messages create? Because a belief is just a thought you continue to think. And once you wake up to what the belief is and where it came from, then you can start to question it. Can I really know that my body has to look like a Victoria's Secret model for me to be good enough? Let's question that one, right? And then you can start questioning it and parting those clouds and clearing the lenses on what's actually true and start creating evidence for what is actually true beyond the misunderstandings that you were buying into previous.
Those are some really great examples. I'm curious about, are there certain things that people tend to have patterns that they identify to prove their self-worth? Is it appearance? Is it different achievements? Things like that. Because you could have, so I grew up in a house with 4 kids. There was always other kids around our house because my parents provided foster care. So there was always random other kids in our house. Sometimes it was 1, sometimes it was 2 extra, 3 extra, depended on the day. But when I look at myself and my siblings, we all grew up in the same environment and we all came out completely different. I'm sure that we all have our own messaging that we received. Are there certain things that people tend to link their self-worth to? What are those things?
Sure. Couple things to share. I love what you just shared with me because it helps to highlight something really important that I don't think everyone realizes. All the kids in the house ending up in a different way, even though they had the same parents. Everybody does have different parents because your parents grow and evolve and change throughout time. Even if just a year passes between kids or something, no child, in my belief, in my opinion, no child is raised by the same parent. I think that's part of it too. Your parent can still give the same messaging because I can relate. My sisters and I are very different. I'm one of 3. We were in the same house, experiencing a lot of the same things at the same time, but sometimes we'll talk about it together, like that time dad exploded and this happened. And I'll talk about my experience. And my sister's, I don't remember that part. And then she tells her part, and I'm like, I don't remember that part. He did that. And it's just because we internalize it differently. So my sister made it mean that maybe my sister made it mean that my dad is a terrible person and he can't be trusted. And maybe I made it mean, oh, he's hurting. He was able to hurt us that much because he was hurt. The same 2 kids can be in the same room, but through their lens of how they see the world, they attach the meaning to whatever. I think that's important to acknowledge that we attach the meaning to whatever happens. And that meaning is where our beliefs come from. And then our beliefs drive our patterns. So that is key without a shadow of a doubt. I don't know if that answered your question or if I went in a different direction. Did I answer your question?
I think you did in a roundabout way. I was looking for, are there certain aspects or certain things that are common, like appearance or achievements or your career? Those are
Yeah.
just some things that come to my mind that people will attach to identify their self-worth. How much money do I make? I grew up in a house that didn't have a lot of money. Now I'm in a place where we're doing pretty well. Never
Yeah.
thought that I would get to this level of success. That was not something that I necessarily attached to my self-worth, but somebody
Mhm.
else, that may be a completely different experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. There's definitely some things that tend to be common. Like success is one of them. I have to get every promotion, I have to get every medal, every achievement. That's one that we see often, but then also money is another big one. Our net worth and self worth can be very tied together. And again, they're different for everyone. You might have a money thing and I might not. And you might have a success thing and I might not. Some of where this can come from is because some of us have it, some of us don't. So here's an example. If you take an innocent child that really just wants mom and dad's attention, but mom and dad are over here fighting or ignoring them or something. But then all of a sudden, the kid says something funny that the parents weren't expecting. They just turn and they look at the kid and they start laughing. They're like, "Oh, buddy, how did you think of that? That was funny. Where did that come from?" The kid unconsciously makes the parent mad. "Oh, when I make mom and dad laugh, they don't fight anymore. And then they give me attention and love." The comedian is born. Now I chase my sense of self worth through being funny and making people laugh and entertaining people. And another example of that is the kid trying to get the good grades. Like, dad is always mad at me when I come in with anything less than an A. So I'm just going to study constantly, nonstop, and I'm going to get straight A's because that's when dad looks at me and says, "Hey, good job." The achiever is born, the overachiever, which can turn into success. I have to chase this career, get the promotion, get the big job. And that's where a lot of it tends to come from. So there are a lot of these common ones, like the comedian is born, the people pleaser is born. I get my sense of worthiness by bending over backwards and pleasing other people and then getting the validation from that because I'm looking externally instead of validating myself. There's definitely some common ones, but it's also important to look at the come from because again, we made it mean that. If I make dad and mom laugh, they stop fighting and I have control over that. And now I feel safe. I feel more worthy, more safe, more loved when I'm making people laugh. Now I'm going to chase my sense of worthiness through that avenue and that approach. Those are some common ones, but really the list is endless. There's so many ways to chase our worthiness. You ever see that person that's always in a relationship? They're never single. They always jump to the next relationship because they're looking for their sense of worthiness through a romantic partner versus let me date myself. Let me tune in and find this and create and cultivate this within. We tend to unconsciously go for things outside of ourselves versus going inward and going direct and meeting those parts of ourselves and learning how to meet our own needs and wake up to our worth.
How does your inner self talk come into play with all of this?
So much. The way we speak to ourselves is a huge indication of what we really believe about ourselves and how we identify ourselves. I can't tell you how much it shifted with clients and myself, but I'll use myself as an example because I think examples help paint the picture for people. Like, I used to beat the crap out of myself anytime I would make a mistake or do something wrong because I made the mistakes mean that I wasn't good enough and that I wasn't worthy. I'm not smart enough if I make a mistake. The language in my head would be, "You effing idiot. I can't believe you made a mistake." Then I'd get all this anxiety and I beat myself up. And anytime I would go to do something else, I would build it up so much in my head and just get crippled with all this anxiety before I did my work because I wanted to perform well and I thought I couldn't make a mistake. So that inner dialogue is huge. If you just slow down and mindfully pay attention throughout your day, throughout your experiences to what language you're using, it's going to give you big indications of how you really feel about yourself. Because since I upgraded my sense of worth and now I know I'm beyond worthy, regardless of any achievement or any label, I don't speak to myself that way anymore. Like, I make a mistake and I'm like, "Oh, sweetheart, that's okay. You did your best. What do you want to do differently next time?" The dialogue just completely changes because I don't view myself the same way. I love that question. And it's definitely something for people to pay attention to. It's a little wisdom, a little nugget of insight every time you notice that in your dialogue. It's letting you know what work you have to.
Yeah. Do you think that we all have an inner critic? We can easily let that run rampant. If you don't have a lot of self worth, but you recognize that you beat yourself up verbally all the time, is that one way that somebody can actually start to raise up their level of worthiness by saying, "Oh, I heard what I just said to myself. That wasn't very kind," to help start build that level of self-worthiness? Because I'm wondering if the more you let that voice in your head beat you up, your self-worth is going to go down. But if you start to build it up, does that help to build you up? Is that your experience? Is that a way that somebody could start this work and develop that worthiness?
Yeah, it's definitely part of it. What I'll add that's important, in addition to starting to build yourself up, notice the language and start to change it, we also have to get to the root of the pattern of the inner critic, of the inner dialogue. Because if we're just trying to layer all this compassion on top of it, but we haven't cleared and looked at and healed the part of us that is critical, this is only going to last so long because the compassion with nothing else can be like a band-aid.
Okay. I'm going to put us on pause because this conversation went to the next level. So, going to shift that over to an episode for next week where we talk about what your inner critic is actually trying to tell you, how you can figure out that lesson, acknowledge it, and move through it. Stay tuned for the next episode, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, subscribe, and share with a friend. Want to learn more about a specific topic? Drop us a line on our website and we can explore it deeper with you.